This is Walter Bosley, and I'll be reading a selection from Programmed to Kill: The Politics of Serial Murder by David McGowan. Together with Aleister Crowley-inspired filmmaker Kenneth Anger, Anton LaVey organized the Magic Circle in San Francisco in the mid-1960s. By 1966, the group had evolved into the Church of Satan. From its inception, LaVey's group included an inordinate number of police, military, and intelligence personnel. One of these was Lieutenant Colonel Michael Aquino, who left LaVey's circle in 1975 to found his own overtly satanic order, the Temple of Set. Before his departure, Aquino had been the highest-ranking member of the Church of Satan other than LaVey. He had joined the Church of Satan upon his return from Vietnam, where he served as a psychological warfare specialist, which very likely means that he served as part of the Phoenix program. Aquino returned from Vietnam with a Bronze Star, an Air Medal, and an Army Commendation Medal. The colonel, who reportedly began reporting directly to the Joint Chiefs of Staff in 1981, is not the only intelligence asset in the Temple of Set. According to a police intelligence report cited by Carl Raschke in 1990, at least two of Aquino's top lieutenants at that time were intelligence operatives as well. Although Aquino denies it, his group embraces an unabashedly fascistic ideology. The reading list that he provides to his followers includes a number of pro-Nazi books, including Adolf Hitler's Mein Kampf. Aquino advises members to look therein for the discussions concerning the selection of leaders, control of the masses, and the justification for human social organization, as he puts it. Aquino's admiration for the Third Reich was also illustrated by his visit to Wewelsburg Castle to perform a satanic working. During the reign of the Nazi Party, Wewelsburg had been lavishly restored by Heinrich Himmler to serve as the headquarters of the Black Order of the SS. As such, it is considered sacred ground by some modern Satanists. Aquino has been known to claim that he is the son of an SS officer, although at other times he has claimed that he is an homunculus magically created by the Babylon working performed by Jack Parsons and L. Ron Hubbard. After the temple was incorporated in the state of California as a non-profit church, Aquino's group quickly received both state and federal recognition, as well as tax-exempt status. The temple's members like to boast of being the only satanic church to hold such credentials. There have been claims made that, like Aquino, LaVey also had a fondness for the Third Reich. Some reports hold that LaVey secretly forged an alliance with the National Renaissance Party, an overtly racist neo-Nazi organization. Such claims are not difficult to believe, given that LaVey's writings reveal an ideology that can be best characterized as fascism cloaked in quasi-religious dogma. His best-known work, the Satanic Bible, contains a dedication to Karl Haushofer, one of the occult architects of the Third Reich. According to some reports, Haushofer dictated virtually verbatim an entire chapter of Mein Kampf, although legend holds that the tome was dictated to Rudolf Hess by an imprisoned Adolf Hitler. Hess was, it should probably be noted, a member of the Thule Gesellschaft, a powerful occult society behind the rise of fascism, and had been a student and protege of Haushofer at the University of Munich. LaVey's prolific writings are filled with pro-police and pro-authoritarian propaganda, unabashed elitism, and calls for the destruction of the weak by the strong. Calls that echo Crowley's writings in the Book of the Law, quoting, "We have nothing with the outcast and unfit. Let them die in their misery, for they feel not. Compassion is the vice of kings. Stamp down the wretched and the weak. This is the law of the strong." End quote. The Church of Satan's promotional literature has proudly proclaimed the Church of Satan to be, quoting, an eclectic body that traces its origins to many sources, including the ritual magic of Aleister Crowley and the Black Order of Germany in the 1920s and 1930s, end quote. Readers are reminded that the Black Order was the elite branch of the Schutzstaffel, or SS, that was primarily responsible for engineering countless crimes against humanity during the reign of the Reich. In The Black Flame, an official publication of the Church of Satan, LaVey once wrote, and I quote, "If a neo-fascist look or outlook makes for men who look like men and women who look like women, I'm all for it," end quote. He also offered the following observation, saying, "There is nothing inherently wrong with fascism given the nature and needs of the average citizen. Now it's not so much a case of avoiding fascism, but of replacing a screwed-up, disjointed, fragmented, and stupefying kind of fascism with one that is more sensible and truly progressive." End quote. Peter Gilmore, a ranking member of the Church of Satan, has described modern Satanism as practiced by LaVey's group as a brutal religion of elitism and social Darwinism that seeks to reestablish the reign of the able over the idiotic, of swift justice over injustice, and for a wholesale rejection of egalitarianism as a myth that has crippled the advancement of the human species for the last 2,000 years. End quote. Gilmore has also advocated the institution of an American Schutzstaffel. The Temple of Set is only one of several groups that have been spawned from LaVey's inner circle. Another is the Werewolf Order, co-founded by LaVey's daughter Zena and Charles Manson admirer Nicholas Schreck. That particular spin-off was patterned directly after the so-called Werewolf Corps, the Nazi terrorist cells created in post-war Germany to thwart attempts at denazification. Zena LaVey and Nicholas Schreck are also notable for hosting, along with publisher Adam Parfrey, a public gathering on August 8, 1988, that was organized to celebrate the anniversary of the slaughter of Sharon Tate by the Manson family. Another disciple of Crowley and an occult superstar in his own right was rocket fuel scientist Jack Parsons. In 1939, Parsons joined the Agape Lodge of the OTO in Pasadena, California, where he also helped found the prestigious Jet Propulsion Laboratory. The Agape was the only OTO lodge in the States at that time, though there was an active lodge in Vancouver started by Charles Stansfield Jones. In 1942, Parsons took the magical name of Frater 210 and assumed leadership of the Pasadena Lodge, with the blessings of Crowley. Parsons led the branch of the German-based pro-Nazi order throughout the war years, while at the same time working on highly classified military projects purportedly aimed at defeating the European fascist powers. One of his early recruits and most avid disciples had just served with the U.S. Navy in the Pacific and was the son of a naval commander. Calling himself Frater H., he claimed at various times to work for the Los Angeles Police Department, the FBI, and the Office of Naval Intelligence. In truth, he may very well have worked for all of them. Frater H., perhaps better known as L. Ron Hubbard, soon became Parsons' right-hand man. In 1946, these two adepts performed an allegedly important ritual that they dubbed the Babylon Working. 2 years later, following the death of Mentor Crowley, Parsons took the oath of the Antichrist and took on an elaborate new name, Beleriand Armilus al-Dajjal Antichrist. His Pasadena mansion served as the lodge's temple. Leadership of the OTO had, for the time being, been passed by Crowley into the hands of Karl Germer, a former Nazi spy. Hubbard, meanwhile, parted ways with Parsons, and by 1950 had launched the Hubbard Dianetics Research Foundation in New Jersey. In May 1950, Astounding Science Fiction, a pulp magazine, introduced Dianetics as a purportedly new science. Within weeks, Hubbard's book had hit the bestseller lists. In 1952, he moved his operation to Phoenix and renamed it the Hubbard Association of Scientologists. In June of that same year, just 2 days short of the summer solstice, Parsons allegedly blew himself up while at work in his private home lab. When informed of her son's death, his mother promptly committed suicide, allegedly. Rumors surrounding Parsons' death named L. Ron Hubbard, Howard Hughes, and Randolph Hearst as possible suspects. In 1953, the Church of Scientology was formally incorporated in Los Angeles. The group grew quickly over the succeeding years, particularly in the late 1960s, when membership quadrupled with the addition of such members as Charles Manson. By 1967, Hubbard's empire included command of a fleet of ships. Though the Church of Scientology had worked hard to gloss over its occult roots, its founder's own son, L. Ron Hubbard Jr., has been quoted as saying, "Hitler was involved in the same black magic and the same occult practices that my father was, the identical ones. My father thought of himself as the Beast 666 incarnate. When Crowley died in 1947, my father then decided that he should wear the cloak of the Beast." There seems to have been a lot of that going around. L. Ron Jr. has also said that the one super-secret sentence that Scientology is built on is, "Do as thou wilt." In the early 1960s, two ranking members of the Church of Scientology, Robert Moore and Marianne McLean, better known as the De Grimstons, split off from London's Hubbard Institute to form the Process Church of the Final Judgment, a group whose official logo is a modified swastika and whose literature included glowing tributes to Nazism, Satan, gore, and necrophilia. The group's bookstore reportedly stocked titles on topics such as Hitler, organized crime, hypnosis, brainwashing, and the occult. Moore, a former cavalry officer and the grandson of a British vicar, M. McLean, a one-time prostitute who was connected to the Profumo scandal and who reportedly believes that she is the reincarnation of Nazi propagandist Joseph Goebbels, first left London with their followers just after the summer solstice of 1966, arriving first in Nassau and then in Stuhl, Mexico. They were soon back in London. By 1967, they had arrived in the States, first setting up shop in New Orleans' French Quarter, where the organization was formally incorporated with the assistance of a former lawyer for the Catholic Church. In March 1968, the group moved their base of operations to San Francisco, taking up a residence not far from LaVey's Church of Satan and various other occult groups, including a branch of the OTO. Recruiters for the group have been in the Bay Area since the 1967 Summer of Love, signing on such members as Brother Eli, a member of the Gypsy Jokers biker gang, whose home, or Process Church Temple, was located just 2 blocks away from the home of the Manson family. From its inception, the Process made no effort to hide its infatuation with death, destruction, and cultural terrorism. In the essay, Jehovah on War, Moore commanded his followers, quoting, "Thou shalt kill." Another essay that appeared in the official Process publication urged readers to experience the pleasures of grave robbing and necrophilia. A rant in the Death issue was penned by a recent transplant to the Bay Area by the name of Charles Manson. Also by 1967, the Process had already spawned at least one spin-off, probably from the group's inner circle, reportedly known as the Omega. The spin-off has been variously referred to as the 4P movement, the 4Pi cult, or the Shingon cult. The group's logo is a stylized swastika composed of 4 Ps, the letter P. Its members are said to share a fascination with Nazi racist doctrines. Author Michael Newton has written, quoting, "If law enforcement spokesmen are correct, the cult is also deeply involved in white slavery, child pornography, and the international narcotics trade." End quote. The first branch of the cult was organized in Northern California and is said to have held its early gatherings in the Santa Cruz Mountains, adjacent to that boiling cauldron of satanic activity known as San Francisco. From this primordial stew, would arise in the late 60s, the Manson family. Much of Manson's ideology was taken directly from the teachings of the Process Church, with whom Charlie was closely connected, as alluded to by Bugliosi in Helter Skelter, and greatly elaborated upon by Ed Sanders in The Family, and by Maury Terry in The Ultimate Evil. Manson was exposed to the process as early as the spring of 1967 at San Francisco's infamous Devil House, and he later claimed to have met the leaders of the process at the Polanski home, which he is known to have visited before the killings. Manson was also linked to the Church of Satan, the Solar Lodge of the OTO, which operated from a ranch near Blythe, and a cult-owned house near the University of Southern California campus, the Church of Scientology, a particularly bizarre group known as the Kirk Order of the Dog Blood, and a number of occult-oriented biker gangs, including the Straight Satans, who once attended a KKK rally in the San Fernando Valley. Additionally, Manson is associated with the Satan Slaves, the Gypsy Jokers, the Jokers Out of Hell, and the Coffin Makers. Terry's evidence indicates that the family was itself a satanic cult, specifically a faction of the process-spawned 4-Pi cult and a sister group to both the New York chapter, said to be responsible for the Son of Sam slayings, and the Santa Cruz, San Francisco faction that may have been responsible for the Zodiac murders. The Manson family, appropriately enough, was also deeply involved in drug trafficking, just as Henry Lee Lucas claimed his cult to be. It is not likely a coincidence that Henry's partner, Otis Toole, was known to have paid visits to the New Orleans headquarters of the Process Church. With all that in mind, we now turn our attention to the San Francisco-Santa Cruz area and the explosion of violent murders that belched forth from that cauldron beginning in the late 1960s. The spawning ground. On March 21, 1967, the spring equinox, Charles Mills Manson was released from prison and given transport to San Francisco, where, despite having served virtually his entire adult life in prison, he immediately started gathering devoted followers, many recruited from the various satanic groups blossoming in the area. In the spring of the following year, 1968, Manson loaded his new followers into a bus and took them on the road, ultimately settling into the Los Angeles area, where Charlie quickly and improbably established numerous prominent contacts in the entertainment industry. As Neil Young, who knew Charlie and his girls well, and once tried to get the head of Warner Brothers to sign the aspiring singer-songwriter, once told an interviewer, "A lot of pretty well-known musicians around L.A. knew him, though they'd probably deny it now." On December 20th, 1968, just shy of the winter solstice, what was thought to be the first of the Zodiac murders rocked the San Francisco area when a man was shot once in the head at point-blank range with a .22 caliber gun, and his female companion was shot multiple times with the same weapon. A detective working the case noted that the male victim had recently learned of a major drug deal that was about to go down, and he had been talking openly about who was involved in the transaction. It would later be speculated that the Zodiac killings actually began in the Los Angeles area on the eve of Halloween 1966, just a few months after the rampages of Richard Speck and Charles Whitman. The victim, Sherry Jo Bates, had been stabbed in the chest and her throat had been slit so deeply that she was nearly decapitated. A wristwatch of military origin had been found at the crime scene, along with a military-style heel print. The circumstances of the murder suggested that the female victim knew her killer and had spent a portion of the evening with him before the attack. What was said to be a confession was received in the mail, and on Walpurgisnacht of 1967, taunting letters were sent to area newspapers and to the victim's father. The FBI would later inadvertently revealed that it had an alternative version of the confession, featuring the exact same wording but set in a different typescript and with a different number of words per line. On Independence Day, 1969, another couple was gunned down in their car, this time with a 9mm semi-automatic. The woman, Darlene Ferrin, who appeared to be the primary target of the attack, may have known the previous Zodiac victims. She had reportedly told her friends that she had witnessed a murder by a man who had subsequently been following her. In the weeks before her death, she had been receiving mysterious packages from a man living in Mexico who Darlene had, for unexplained reasons, married in 1966 using an assumed name, and then later divorced. Her companion on the night of the murder, Michael Mageau, left his home in such a hurry that the lights and TV were left on and the front door was left open. He later told investigators that he and Darlene were followed immediately upon leaving Ferrin's house. After changing his story several times, Mageau went into hiding. Shortly after the shootings, police received a call from a man claiming credit for Ferrin's murder. The call was placed from a payphone just outside the sheriff's station. At the end of July, the first of what proved to be a long series of letters arrived at area newspaper offices with a request that the letter be published on August 1st, the occult holiday known as Lammas. The series of letters were laced with codes that suggested that the writer had a background in naval intelligence, bringing the ONI, or the Office of Naval Intelligence, onto the case. Other agencies that investigated the Zodiac killings included the FBI, the U.S. Postal Service, the California Department of Justice, and 4 local police agencies. On August 4th, 1969, the killer supplied his moniker in a letter that began, quoting, "This is the Zodiac speaking," end quote. Just days later, on the nights of August 8th and 9th, the Manson family committed 2 of the most notorious multiple murders in the nation's history, the Tate LaBianca slayings. The Manson killings were part of a weekend orgy of violence in Los Angeles that saw the city record 29 known homicides in just 4 days. Before the search for the perpetrators of the high-profile murders was over, it would involve the FBI, the Mossad, the California Beverage Control Board, the U.S. Treasury Department, the L.A. County District Attorney's Office, the LAPD, the L.A. Sheriff's Office, and Colonel Paul Tate, a U.S. Army intelligence asset, Vietnam veteran, and the father of victim Sharon Tate. Also brought in by Roman Polanski to assist in his own investigation of the killings was famed psychic Peter Hurkos. Hurkos had earlier made a high-profile appearance alongside of F. Lee Bailey in the Boston Strangler case, which will be covered in a later chapter. At the time of the Manson murders, Hurkos was involved in organizing a Black Arts Festival scheduled for Halloween Day, 1969. The event's other organizers were Timothy Leary and Anton LaVey, who were scheduled to host the festival before it was canceled. The month after the Tate LaBianca killings, and just after the autumnal equinox, a man and woman were stabbed multiple times in a San Francisco area park, despite the fact that it took nearly an hour for an ambulance to respond to a call. As the pair lay bleeding, the man survived the attack, in what was to be the only known case of a serial killer showing up for work dressed in a logo-bearing costume. The assailant was described as wearing a strange hood with an attached apron that prominently displayed the trademark symbol of the Zodiac. The attacker reportedly had a gun, but chose instead to use a knife, breaking from the previous pattern and likely contributing to the survival of the male victim. Prints from a military-issue boot distributed primarily to U.S. naval bases on the West Coast were found at the scene. The professed killer again called police, again from a payphone near a local police station this time. He reportedly left a clear palm print on the phone, but a allegedly nervous technician reportedly destroyed it. On October 11, 1969, one day shy of the birthday of Aleister Crowley, a taxi driver was shot once in the head with a 9mm handgun, although it was a different 9mm than had been used previously by the Zodiac killer. At 4 San Francisco area crime scenes, the Zodiac had now used a different weapon at each. The latest victim had picked up his fare on Mason Street and had then driven him to an address in the Presidio Heights area of the city, where he was promptly shot. Some local kids witnessed the murder and immediately called the police with a description of the assailant. For unexplained reasons, however, the police dispatcher broadcast a description of a black perpetrator, allowing the real shooter to evade a massive police response. 2 days later, a new letter from the Zodiac claimed credit for the killing and threatened a future attack on a school bus. On October 22nd, a man identifying himself as the Zodiac Killer called authorities and requested to speak, strangely enough, to either F. Lee Bailey or San Francisco attorney Melvin Belli. A spectacle then played out in which the man, calling himself Sam, called and had a live chat on the air with CIA-linked Belli. In November, another letter arrived from the elusive Zodiac, this one containing a bomb threat. Also in November 1969, 2 Scientologists were found savagely murdered on the streets of Los Angeles. Each had been stabbed more than 50 times. One of the victims had dated Charles Manson disciple Bruce Davis in 1968, just before Charlie had sent Davis to London to visit both the headquarters of the Process Church and the local Scientology school. Davis was later convicted of other unrelated murder charges, and he has been identified by some researchers as a possible suspect in the Zodiac killings. Another Zodiac letter addressed to Belli was sent on December 20th, just shy of the winter solstice. On April 20th, 1970, yet another letter was sent. It was followed by a greeting card with a dragon on April 28th. The next day, on the eve of Walpurgisnacht, the Zodiac's bomb threat was revealed to the public, ratcheting up the already high level of fear in the Bay Area. Interestingly, one of the Zodiac's numerous letters contained a coded reference to the locations of the killings. A decoding suggested that the crime scenes formed a pattern that centered on Mount Diablo and that utilized an obscure unit of measurement known as a radian, which is a mathematical unit based on the number pi. Elsewhere in the country, a man named Stanley Baker was convicted in July 1970 for the murder of a Montana resident. Baker made a candid admission to his arresting officers, quoting, "I have a problem. I am a cannibal," end quote. As proof, he produced from his pocket a well-gnawed human finger. Baker was the talkative sort, and he readily confessed his involvement in a number of other murders that he claimed he had committed as a member of the process-spawned 4-Pi cult. Police were able to confirm his complicity in a particularly brutal mutilation murder in San Francisco, thanks to his having left behind a bloody fingerprint. California courts nevertheless declined to prosecute Baker for the homicide with the remarkable claim that he had been denied a speedy trial. Despite his confessed involvement in a number of murders, and despite the fact that the murder for which he was convicted involved him ripping out the man's heart and eating it, Baker was released from prison after just 14 years, and according to recent reports, he remains at large today. This in spite of the fact that he distinguished himself as something less than a model prisoner during his incarceration by starting his own satanic cult and having no fewer than 11 weapons confiscated by guards. Just as Stanley Baker and Charlie Manson had migrated away from San Francisco, so did many other disenchanted hippies and flower children move on in the late 1960s and early 1970s. Many of them found refuge in the hundreds of square miles of sparsely settled wilderness offered by the Santa Cruz Mountains, where the abundance of rich soil and clear running water provided ideal conditions for communal living and marijuana cultivation. By 1972, some 17,000 men, women, and children had taken up residence in the fertile glens and along the rich creek beds of Santa Cruz. As Margaret Cheney described the scene, quoting, "Every enterprising commune or solo druid grew a patch of cannabis, but it did not end there. More enterprising men began to operate small portable pill factories in the remoter parts of the forest, turning out LSD and amphetamines for the city market, free of police harassment. A small cult of Satanists from San Francisco liked the landscape and opened a local parish. After them came pretenders, exploiters, and hangers-on. The more sensational news media promoted the black mass aura. Small sacrificial animals were occasionally found beheaded." End quote. Seemingly random, motiveless killings quickly began to plague Santa Cruz. On October 19, 1970, in a case closely mirroring the slaughter of the residents of the Tate House the year before, John Lindley Frazier, allegedly acting alone, killed all the occupants of a home in Santa Cruz, including a prominent doctor, his wife, secretary, and 2 children. Frazier, who was known to have a strong interest in the occult, was said to have started his own lifestyle as an Aquarian Age hermit living in a 6-foot square shack in the woods, a lifestyle later adopted by Ted Kaczynski, who was a subject of MKUltra experiments while he was a young student at Harvard, and who has been named by some researchers as a possible suspect in the Zodiac killings. Just over a week after the Frazier killings, a Halloween card was received from the Zodiac killer. More cards and letters followed, the last of which arrived in 1974. The murders were never solved, though many believe that, as Inyo County District Attorney Frank Fowles has stated, Manson and the Zodiac killer were connected. Soon after Frazier's rampage, women began going missing from around the Santa Cruz area. As early as autumn of 1968, reports began surfacing of grisly occult sacrifices being performed in the surrounding mountains. By the summer of 1972, it was clear that Santa Cruz had a problem. Mutilated bodies began showing up in the hills. By the time 1973 rolled around, the bodies were piling up at an alarming rate. In just the first 6 weeks of the year, 8 bodies were found, and women were continuing to disappear. What had once been an idyllic community had been radically transformed. The murder rate had quintupled, and Santa Cruz had achieved the rather dubious distinction of having the highest homicide rate in the country. Many of the area's killings were credited to 2 alleged serial killers, Edmund Kemper and Herb Mullen, who were said to be operating at the same time in the same city, though acting independently of each other. Kemper's bloody odyssey reportedly included 8 victims brutally butchered between May 1972 and April 1973, most of them co-eds whose corpses were cannibalized and sexually violated. Mullen was credited with dispatching 13 victims in just 4 months, from October 13, 1972 through February 13, 1973. Mullen admitted to having a strong interest in the occult, a fact made evident by the nature of the killings attributed to him. The first victim was killed on Friday the 13th, the second on or about Halloween, and the third murder was the stabbing of a Catholic priest in his confessional on November 2nd, celebrated as All Souls Day. To briefly recap, no fewer than 6 serial killers, mass murderers, Charles Manson, Stanley Baker, Edmund Kemper, Herbert Mullen, John Lindley Frazier, and the Zodiac Killer, were all spawned from the Santa Cruz, San Francisco metropolitan area in a span of just over 4 years, at a time when so-called serial killers were a rare enough phenomenon that they hadn't yet acquired the name. And another serial killer was said to be at work not far away during the same time frame. As Ted Bundy chronicler Richard Larson recounts, the bodies of at least 14 young women and girls were found, nude and with their belongings missing, in Northern California between December 1969 and December 1973. In the immediate vicinity of each of the bodies was found an elaborate witchcraft symbol of twigs and rocks. Remarkably enough, the crimes collectively attributed to these men did not even account for all the ritualized homicides that occurred in the Bay Area during that time. For example, the murder of Fred Bennett, the captain of the Oakland chapter of the Black Panthers, whose mutilated remains were found scattered in the Santa Cruz Hills, was never solved, and many of the young students who were reported missing from local campuses were never found, either dead or alive, and were therefore never listed as homicide victims. On October 12, 1974, the birthday of Aleister Crowley, student Arliss Perry was brutally murdered and left on display in the Stanford Memorial Church on the campus of Stanford University, nestled in the shadows of the Santa Cruz Mountains. Perry was left lying on her back with her head toward the altar and her legs spread wide. She was nude from the waist down, and an altar candle protruded from her vagina. Another altar candle was wedged between her exposed breasts. Her jeans had been neatly arranged in an inverted V shape and placed across her splayed legs, forming the Masonic symbol of the compass and the square. 5 years earlier, the very same symbol had been left carved into the stomach of Charles Manson victim Lino LaBianca as the W in the word war. The prime suspect in the still unsolved murder of Perry is a man named Bill Menser, who knew Charles Manson and at least one of his victims, Abigail Folger. In fact, Menser reportedly had lunch with Folger just a few days before her death. He was later connected to David, the son of Sam, Berkowitz as well, and still later was convicted of the Cotton Club murder of aspiring film producer Roy Radin. A few years after Perry's murder, a new rash of serial killings began in nearby Sacramento, California. These were ultimately attributed to a man named Richard Chase, who also was known as the Vampire of Sacramento and the Dracula Killer. These killers, Chase, Manson, Kemper, Mullen, the Zodiac, Frazier, and Baker, heralded the dawn of a new era that soon had established serial killers as an ever-present part of the American landscape. Before 1960, fewer than 2 so-called serial killers a year were reported nationwide. By 1970, the number had climbed to 6 per year. By 1980, to nearly 20 per year. By 1990, nearly 3 dozen serial killers a year were being reported across the country. The years covered by the occult bloodbath in Northern California, 1967 through 1973, correspond precisely to the years that the Phoenix program in Vietnam was in full operation, although similar programs under different names existed prior to 67. In September 1973, the head of the Phoenix operation, William Colby, was appointed as the new director of the Central Intelligence Agency. Phoenix had officially come home. This is Walter Bosley, and I just read a selection from Programmed to Kill by David McGowan.